Thank you for joining us today at the Project Management Institute's Sustainability Summit 2023. We hope you enjoyed that session, and we will now have a short break.
PMI is a purpose-led organization dedicated to enabling our community to elevate the positive impact on society. We believe that protecting our planet and improving the lives of people worldwide is essential for creating peace and prosperity. The Sustainability Summit is a great example of PMI in action. This event wants to turn frustration into positive action and to go beyond talk into commitment and making a positive mark using the power of project.
Hi everyone, and welcome to the latest instalment of the Food and Water System, or systems. And today we're talking about the systems concept of setting boundaries. Not so much about healthy interpersonal relationships, but rather about systems thinking. And just a note for today, I've been playing around with an AI art generator to see what would happen, and I've asked for things in the style of Van Gogh. So, what system exists so that I can go downstairs and eat apple pie? Well, if I drew the boundary of my house, then the question very much is there an apple pie in my house? And this is largely dependent on whether I have been to a shop that sells pie. And so in some ways, I guess you could say, well, the system boundary is my house plus the distance between me and the pie shop, or the system is my house and the pie shop. But what about where the pie comes from? So let's take us back to prehistoric Britain. You know, that's my favourite thing to do. What system exists for there to be apple pie in Neolithic Britain? Well, the answer is there is not a system that exists that would give you apple pie. There probably aren't apples, or there might be some apples, but it's likely that if there's anything apple-like at that point, it's wild crab apples, and they're quite likely to be sour. There isn't any pastry. There isn't really flour as we would recognise it. There probably is barley-based bread of some description. There may or may not be butter, but there is probably lard. There is good evidence for honey. So the closest you're going to get to apple pie is something like barley, flatbread, sour, apple, honey cake. Delicious. So let's go forward in time to a time when we know that there is definitely apple pie. There is good evidence of apple pie in Tudor England. And here from the National Archives is in fact a recipe for apple pie, which includes apples, butter and eggs, flour, ginger, mace, cinnamon and sugar, all of which would have been treated as spices at the time, and interestingly, rose water. So then I thought, okay, so where would these ingredients have come from? And so the apples would probably have come from the orchard associated with the manor, and the butter and eggs almost certainly would also have come from the working farm for the manor house. The flour probably would have been grown in the local area, and that arrow there is pointing to the mill that served the local area between Saltwich and Pepperwich. And there was definitely a roaring spice trade in the Tudor era, and so it's likely that in terms of the manor house, they would have got their spices from Pepperwich, which was a port. So then I thought, well, let's ask myself the question today. You know, if I was making an apple pie from scratch, what was the boundary of the source of the pie? Well, the apples, apparently, in the UK, we do grow a lot of our own apples, but it's about a half, I think. And then quite a lot of apples come from South Africa, Italy, the Netherlands, and other places in Europe, and also apparently New Zealand. Sugar. So Britain grows approximately half of its own sugar through sugar beet, and imports approximately half of its sugar, which is probably cane sugar, from Brazil. Spices still very much come from the east, and apparently a lot of spices come from India. wheat. So Britain does grow a lot of its own wheat, but actually also imports a fair amount from Germany and Canada, according to Google. And just to push the point, this is the list of ingredients in a fairly standard free from apple pie that you could buy from a pretty normal British supermarket. And as you can tell from the list of ingredients, which is extensive, this is a very international apple pie, where rice flour, palm oil, palm fat, and coconut oil are singularly unlikely to have been grown in the UK. So what is the boundary for this pie? Is it the whole planet? This whole planet that is called the blue planet. And just with a quick dive into the AI art, I typed in planet Earth from space, style of Van Gogh, blue planet. And as you can see, there are some quite interesting results here. Ones with lots and lots of planets, ones with half-broken planets, some interesting ones where one planet appears to be eating the other, some of the pitfalls of AI art. But in the end, I landed on this one, which I thought was quite pretty. So it's called the blue planet because, hopefully, as we know from geography lessons at school, most of the surface of planet Earth is covered in water. And here's the water cycle, or the water system, with evaporation from over the seas, building up clouds, which then there's precipitation over the land, which then flows back down into rivers, back into the seas, and on and on. So is the boundary for the water system the atmosphere? Well, that's not very helpful if you're trying to design drainage. This takes me back to my days of being a drainage engineer. Here we have approved document H, which is from the British building code. And here you're sort of designing for, sinks and toilets for a house, or roof areas for rainwater and rainfall intensities. And you kind of have to use a whole load of averages and rules of thumb, because otherwise you'd never be able to design anything. But obviously the boundaries can't be that fixed, and this is what happened when I asked the AI art to add a few more bits and pieces. You've got cows, and you've got a road, and you've got crops and a city, and obviously there's lots and lots of mixing between these things, and you can't just tell a bee, well, oh, no, you were only assigned to the river. You need to stay on the river because that's where the ownership boundary is. So it is useful to set boundaries because you need some boundaries to be able to define a project or a scope or a design. But the question I'd like to leave you with is, well, what happens if we asked ourselves, what if the boundaries are permeable? What am I missing that is outside where I have drawn my boundary? Because although you do need to be able to define a clear scope for a project, the consideration of externalities and some of those extra effects is also incredibly important. Thanks very much.
Creating a more sustainable future is the challenge of the century. Together we can engage, inspire and mobilise for action to improve the situation for people and the planet. How? Through the power of projects. Project management brings together the why, the what and the how. Let's come together to use our skills for action. Please get ready because the next session is about to start.